My name is Eva Dzigok, and I will tell you about some introductory points of financial risk. So first of all, let us describe the enterprise of the risk management. So we can establish or we can observe several types or steps of risk management. First of them is risk identification. So we have to identify what kind of risk we can expect from our common life or running the company. Then there is the risk hierarchy, where we have to establish the level of the risk, potential risk. Then we have to measure that risk, monitor, because of course the risk measurement is not enough, we have to monitor it during the whole period. And risk reporting is something which is usually expected from supervisors from our company running. To establish the risk management framework, we have to, of course, input it into our organization set. And if you look at this picture, you have the division between risk management and risk infrastructure. So risk management is generally what kind of risk we can observe, but risk infrastructure is just the architecture inside the company. So if you look at the left side of this picture, you can observe that there are four main types of risk. One of them is liquidity risk, which is generally connected with the risk of losing the ability to pay the debts for the company. Then we have market risk, which will be shown deeper in detail on the next slide. Then we have credit risk, which is connected with risk of default. And then there is operational risk, which is usually connected with different aspects like human aspects or IT aspects or climate aspects. So these which are not strictly connected with the market precisely and the standing of the company. Then on the right side you have risk infrastructure, so how the risk should be managed inside the company. So first of all, there is the whole part of organization inside the company. Then we have administration of the risk, so who is responsible for this risk. And then we have risk management system, the whole architectural system inside the company, and risk disclosure. In case of market risk, you can see four types. So one of them is liquidity, but this is not the same liquidity as the liquidity of the company, because liquidity is usually, this type of liquidity is connected with the liquidity of the asset. So sometimes we have the issue which is quite huge, and then liquidity is quite high because there is no difficulties to sell or buy that asset. Or sometimes we have the asset which has only limited issue, and then the price usually is very changeable because of this lack of liquidity. So this is a kind of consequence of liquidity, price change. This is the risk which is also connected with the asset. So what is the probability that the price could be changed in the life of the asset? Then we have interest rate risk, which is usually connected with the situation of the market, mainly influenced by the central bank decisions, but also by the situation of the market and the external and internal circumstances. So we are faces interest rate risk when we buy the asset at one level, and then situation on the market is changed, and now the level of interest rates in the market is completely different, and we are not able to maintain our initial return. And of course the last one is foreign exchange risk, which is connected with the investment taken outside, usually investors' country, and is connected with change between currencies. So these are main market risks. And I, in shortly, deliver you the environment of risk. But if we face the possibility of investment, of course, each of us has different approach to risk. And there are, of course, people who are risk seekers. And of course, on the other side, there are a lot of people who are risk averse, so they are afraid of volatility inside the market. So these are three types which could be recognized inside among investors. One of them are risk averse people who generally expect higher return if the risk increases. Then we have risk neutral people who generally ignore the risk. And then we have risk seekers, which means that the higher potential risk, the biggest opportunity for such person appears. These three approaches were connected with utility function, or are represented by utility function, and you can see three types of investors just described in the form of function. Inside coordinate you see utility and wealth, so this is just the relation between utility and wealth. And you can observe that the risk-averse person is represented by concave function, and the more risk-averse person is, the more concave the function could be. If we see the neutral person, its utility or his or utility function is linear function, and in case of risk-seeking person or investor, then his approach is represented by convex function, and the more risk seeker the person is, the more convex function represents his or her behavior. And here you have also the description which shows the relation between expected return and expected standard deviation. And here you have how the same approach could be described on coordinates between and relation between expected return and standard deviation. And you see that the risk-averse person expects a higher expected return when the risk is increasing. The risk-neutral person represents the person who represents neutral approach to risk. He or she doesn't expect any additional return when the risk increases. And for the person who is risk seeker, as you see, the return doesn't matter. And here you see first description of the risk, because I told you that there is the relation between return and the risk. And risk here is represented by standard deviation. And this is one of the most popular risk measure. And it is just shown as a standard deviation of potential return. So here we see the expected return, and here there is the standard deviation. In case of return which is represented by normal distribution, you can observe how many cases could be described in the form of deviation from expected return. So we know the probability of potential expected return in case of standard distribution. And here is risk-return relationship in case of asset approach. So you see that the higher risk is, of course, the higher return could be expected, because we assume that a standard investor is usually risk-averse person, and we can observe that the bigger risk is on the market, the bigger as expected return could be achieved. And here you have the examples. So of course the cash which is kept in our pockets has the lower risk, but of course the return is also very low. And then bonds which are usually fixed income papers, the risk is quite low, and then of course the return is also not so high. And you see the higher risk, the higher return could be expected. The question is whether you can lower the risk, and one of this method is risk diversification. If we observe the markets, unfortunately, we can't decrease the risk to zero, because there is something which is called market risk, and it is non-diversified, and we have unfortunately faced the market risk without possibility to decrease it to zero. Of course, diversification, so put some assets into the portfolio, let us decrease the risk, but it is impossible to decrease the risk to zero. And then Markowitz theory let us decrease the risk by quite high level, and this is typical approach to Markowitz theory. So you can observe the feasible set. This is the set of all assets or all portfolios which are available on the market. So each dot here just represents the potential portfolio, and the question is what is the most attractive for the investor. Of course, the most attractive is what gives us the highest return. So if you see that here is the risk, here is the return, so of course each investor who is risk averse is looking for the portfolio which is represented by the higher return. So if we accept such a level of risk, of course we are looking for the portfolio which represents the higher return. And because most of risk averse people is looking for the highest return when the risk is established, this is why this bolded line is called efficient frontier, because this is the most attractive set of portfolios for each risk-averse person. Of course, the minimal variance, this is the portfolio which shows us the smallest level of risk. So, as I told you before, we can't decrease risk to zero, so this is the least risky portfolio on the market. So the risk-averse investor usually is seeking for a portfolio which lies on efficient frontier. And then a risk infrastructure. So this is the right side of our first part. So as you see here, these are key aspects for the appropriate organization of risk management structure. So first of all, usually the risk department should be independent from other, not be influenced by people who face different risky transactions. So this is why risk management part should be quite outside of typical transaction and procedure part. Then staff, which ensures adequate risk management group for appropriately qualified personnel. And of course, we have another separate part which represent control part, which check the risk management idea. So this is general, very introductory approach to financial risk management. So thank you very much for your attention.